Hello and welcome everybody. This is our first video on character series. Have you guys ever seen a movie called Star Wars? Well, in Star Wars, everyone knows the bad guy, Darth Vader. My question is, how did Darth Vader go from this to this? So there, Darth Vader goes from the bad guy to the good guy. How does somebody make that change? How does somebody go from being bad to being good? And what does it take for somebody who is a murderer of Christians to go to a Christian believer? These are just a few questions that we're going to answer today in this character series. Do you guys know Paul? The character Paul in the Bible is a great man. Paul has done a lot of things. In fact, he's written almost a quarter of the Bible. He's even been called the greatest missionary of all time. His beginnings, though, were a lot like Darth Vader. He wasn't good the entire time. Paul actually begins his career as Saul, and Saul is a professional Christian hunter. So, how does a man who calls himself the chief of sinners become the ambassador for Christ? Let's turn to the book of Acts and see how God can change the heart of a murderer to the heart of a believer. I'll set the scene. Jesus has recently been resurrected, and he's now put his disciples in charge. The church is now reliant on the Holy Spirit to guide their every move. The only problem? The church is growing fast, and the 12 disciples can't handle everything on their own. So a proposal is made. Let's look at Acts chapter 6, verse 3. Brothers and sisters, choose 7 men from among you who are known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. We will turn this responsibility over to them, and we will give our attention to prayer and the ministry of the word. This proposal pleased the whole group. They chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit. So there's that. They come up with a plan to give work not just for the disciples, but to other people in the ministry. The church is going to grow from this, and it does. The plan works, and all is good. Well, thank you everybody for just participating in this project. I'm so happy that we all got to play a part in what we're doing here. So anyways, we'll pack up. Hey, Caleb.
You know the story's not over, right?
Oh, for real? So it turns out that all is not good. Opposition arose, however, from the members of the synagogue. Then they secretly persuaded some of the men to say, "We have heard Stephen speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God." What the old church leaders are accusing Stephen of is blasphemy against God, which is a very serious accusation. It's actually punishable by death. But what these leaders are doing is wrong. They're not telling the full story here. Stephen explains that Jesus, who is God, took what Moses' law began with and fulfilled it. Why would the old church have a problem with this? Well, it's because they didn't receive Jesus as the Messiah. Even with all Jesus' miraculous signs and all the things that he did that other people couldn't do, including being raised from the dead, they still couldn't believe. So they had a problem, and they had a problem with what Stephen was teaching. Stephen's in trouble. While on trial, Stephen recounts the story of Moses, and he tells them what it really means. You see, Moses freed his people, the Israelites, from slavery from Egypt. They earned their freedom by becoming close to God. And they were able to come close to God because Moses brought down God's law. You've probably heard of them. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not covet. Those things. You know those laws, right? And this is the very law that the old church is clinging to. Now, although these rules are relevant today, they aren't the focus that we have today because of Jesus' sacrifice. Now, here's where Stephen makes his most important point. But our ancestors refused to obey him. Instead, they rejected him in their hearts and turned back to Egypt. You stiff-necked people, your hearts and ears are still uncircumcised. You are just like your ancestors. You always resisted the Holy Spirit. Was there ever a prophet your ancestors did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one. And now you have betrayed and murdered him. You who have received the law that was given through angels but have not obeyed it. See, what Stephen is saying here is that their people rejected Moses, even though he freed them from slavery and brought them closer to God. And the same thing happens in their time. They reject Jesus and they even killed him. Now Stephen is saying, you guys are rejecting me, who's bringing you the same truth that Moses did and that Jesus did, and you're persecuting me just the same way. Don't you see the pattern? At this, they covered their ears, yelling at the top of their voices. They all rushed at him, dragging him out of the city, and began to stone him. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul. That's right, our hero of the story, Saul, is the man carrying out Stephen's murder. Unfortunately, Saul doesn't stop here. He carries out a campaign to destroy the Christian church. Innocent people are thrown into prison, separated from families, and murdered. The new church is broken, and it's scattered all over Israel. All hope is lost. But God has a plan. Those who have been scattered preach the word wherever they went. Philip went down to the city in Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah there. When the crowds heard Philip and saw the signs he performed, they all paid close attention to what he said. For with shrieks, impure spirits came out of many, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was great joy in that city. Instead of pouting, instead of getting down, the new church takes the gospel and brings it to other cities. Through the disciples and the other Christians, miracles happen. People are healed. As the new church grows again, Saul sees this and becomes frustrated. He decides to turn things up a notch and increases his campaign. He plans to travel to Damascus to do the same thing he did in Jerusalem, destroy and scatter the new Christian church. But things don't go exactly how he plans. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him, and he fell on the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And unfortunately, this is where we have to leave off. But that just means you get to come back next week and hear the rest of Saul's journey. But before we leave, we have to have a few takeaways. And number one is this: God can turn any situation into a good situation. Saul hurt the new Christian church, but God was able to put what sin Saul had to use. Because of this, the church was able to spread out to other cities and grow. And number two is this: God is working in our lives even when things seem at their worst. He used the sin and troubles that they were going through from Saul to help grow the church and bring them back together and making them stronger. Next time things seem bleak, seem dangerous, seem down, just remember that God is working in the background for us. And number three, be ready for a battle, because I promise you, a battle is coming. Stephen was bold with his sharing of the gospel. Unfortunately, it caused him some trouble, but he prepared himself with the truth, knowing what Moses' law really was about and how Jesus fit into that narrative. He knew the truth, and we should too. Thank you all for being with us here today. We have curriculum and we have questions in the link below. So if you guys have an opportunity, go to that and you can learn a little bit more about Saul and Paul. And with that, we'll see ya.